Tonight's lecture is about the Tao Te Ching. Remember in the lecture about Confucius, we talked about Te being the virtue, the trait of virtue. That this is the quality in a person that must be present for this person to be a leader. In order for a person to rise to the highest levels of society in personal life, in relationships, and in professional life, one must have the quality of Te, that of virtue. And so tonight we're going to talk about the Tao Te Ching, which is literally translated as the scripture or the writings that show us the way to virtue. It's important to remember that these words were written 400 years before Christ appeared on the scene. This is again part of later on in the axial age, when all of this incredible thinking was being done about moralities and virtue, and how do we govern well. So the Tao Te Ching is a Chinese text, and we're going to talk about it tonight. It is one of the most widely distributed and translated texts in Chinese history. It was written about 2,500 years ago, about the same time when the Buddha was teaching about Dharma and when Pythagoras was teaching in Greece. It's probably the most influential book in all of Chinese history, being translated more times than any Chinese document. It provides the basis for the philosophical school of Daoism, or the philosophy of the way. This is an important pillar of Chinese thought. It thought that there were three pieces to this word, and I'm going to show you. Dao, the way. Te, strength. And then Ching, the scripture. So it's literally the scriptures that shows us the way to strength and virtue. Who wrote it? Many of you have heard of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is a great Chinese philosopher who was said to have written the Tao Te Ching. But, as most of these ancient documents, we're not even sure if he was indeed the author of the Tao Te Ching. However, his name did become synonymous with the writings, and it happens to be his only work. So, if he didn't write it, I don't know what else to say. It's the only work he's known for, and if he didn't write it, I feel bad for him. But the Tao Te Ching is likely to be the work of many authors in a similar fashion to the Bible. It's a collection and a compendium of phrases, of sayings that help us better understand the ways of strength and virtue. And it became the foundation for a brand new religion. Lao Tzu, his name is also written as Lao Tse or Lao Tzi, was known as Lier and Lao Dan. He was supposedly born in 604 BCE, before Common Era. He's also known as the Old Master. So remember we talked about Confucius being called Kongfuzi. Here we see again Lao Tzu, the Master Lao. The essence of Chinese philosophy is humanism. Man has created society and has endured within it since the dawn of time. Ethical and political discussions have often overshadowed any speculation about gods or powers. So here we see a distinct difference when we're talking about philosophies and theologies from east to west. In the West, we're very focused on, is there a God? Is Jesus the Son of God? What is the lineage? And when we talk about Islam, how did Muhammad get the message from Gabriel? And where does this message come from? How is his lineage traced? In the East, they're not concerned about such things. The important questions are, who are we? What are we here for? How do we live well? And how do we eliminate suffering in our lives? As the Buddha would say, and many of the great philosophers would tell you, that these other questions about whether or not there is or isn't a God, they would say is probably over or beyond our pay grades. We simply aren't able to even comprehend of the right questions to ask. So why focus our lives on such questions which have nothing to do with the quality of our lives? Instead, focus on being good. focus on being strong, focus on being kind. But strength is important because a weak person cannot be merciful. By virtue of the fact that they have no strength at all, mercy cannot be shown. It is only through strength that one can show and evidence mercy. So strength is important, and when one is strong, the evidence of that virtue is in mercy and kindness. This focus on humanism doesn't mean that they weren't interested in understanding whether or not there was a God, or whether or not there was a supreme being of any kind. But instead, they focused on the relationship between man and heaven. Chinese humanism is an important part for us to remember. It's an important segment in Chinese history. From the Shang dynasty, where we have the god Shangdi, China was changing from a tribal society to a feudal society, from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. A new economy and a new society required new skills, new tools, and new talents. So they were focused on their gods, but now they recognized that they needed to focus on themselves. If they were going to make this transition to a new society, they had to stop worrying about what the heavens were saying. They had to start finding solutions for themselves. Consider that at the same time, about 4,000 years ago, Jewish history was beginning with the patriarchs, Abraham, his son Isaac, and his grandson Jacob. The book of Genesis tells us how Abraham was summoned from the Ur of the Chaldeans, from Canaan, to bring about this new faith, to bring about this new kingdom with the belief in one God. And keep in mind, this was all new. Across the world, everyone was believing in polytheism, the belief in many gods. And then we went from polytheism to henotheism, which is the belief in many gods, but one God being more powerful than the others. And then from henotheism to monolatry, being that there are still many gods, but one God was the ruling God. And then from monolatry to monotheism, that there is only one God. Throughout most of Jewish history, they believed in polytheism. Consider that the first of the 10 Commandments is what? I am the Lord your God. You shall put no other gods before me. Why would they have said this if there were no other gods? This isn't a metaphor. This isn't about talking about money or power. There were literally hundreds of other gods that could have come before. In fact, when Moses came down from the mountain after receiving the 10 Commandments, what did he find his brother doing? His brother Aaron and their families were melting down their gold to worship a different God, despite the fact that they had just been brought out of slavery from Egypt, so the story says. So at the same time now, we're seeing from in Chinese history, this changes in their society. During the Zhao dynasty, people learned that they could do for themselves and answer their own prayers. So why pray to God when we have within ourselves the very power to answer our own prayers? This was a dramatic change in human history that was happening in the Chinese Zhao dynasty. Prayers for rain gradually gave place to irrigation. This now became the age of mankind. The Shang people had believed in the tribal lord, and they believed in their ancestors. Now, they still revered their ancestors, but they focused on themselves and their abilities to make change and to be their own gods. During the Zhao dynasty, the god Shangdi was gradually supplanted by heaven, Tian. You'll see this word Tian or Tien throughout Vietnam. You'll see the word Tien. This means heaven. And you'll hear people named Tien. This is the supreme spiritual reality. So it's not some God that we often think of as a personal, loving God or a creator God. This is more of a God, almost like the deists of our founding fathers of the United States would have thought about, that this is a source of reason, of universal harmony, of principles that guide and underpin our universe. This is the supreme spiritual reality. Its anthropomorphic character decreased. So we no longer see this, we don't have these ideas in Asian religion about this long bearded white man who sits on high and judges from above. No, it's much more of an ethereal nature. However, the spiritual did have its ethereal whims as well. And we had to be in line with the mandate of heaven. The mandate was absolute and constant and beyond man's control. In time, however, as man grew in importance, it felt that rewards and punishments depended on man's virtue. So now we see the need for governance. You can believe in these things, but now governance comes into play. How do we get these beliefs to govern our lives? Well, we have to make sure that there's rewards and punishments, that some people are rewarded for good behaviors and others are punished for poor behaviors. So now the idea, heaven is always kind to the virtuous. Thus, as in many religions, virtue became a determining factor, how one could control one's own destiny. Not only in this life that virtue was rewarded, not so much today, but virtue in these back in these days was rewarded. That a person was seen as virtuous was powerful. Religious sacrifices continued to play a great role in the lives of the people. The meaning of sacrifice, however, was changing. Instead of sacrificing to a specific god for a specific reason, it was pure forms of reverence, as you'll see in many of the temples today. When you get a chance to go to temples in Vietnam, and certainly in Thailand as well, you will see these forms of expression change. This isn't about worshiping a specific god or going in and asking for prayers. It's much more about expressing one's reverence for the beauty that surrounds us. So what is Daoism? It's also spelled Daoism, as you'll see it with a D-A-O. This is a religion and a philosophy from ancient China that has influenced both folklore and national belief. And as many of you have already seen, the infusion of Confucian thought throughout Southeast Asia, you will also see these principles of Daoism. And for those of you who get a chance, try to visit a Tao temple, a Taoist temple, while you're in Vietnam. Daoism holds that humans and animals should live in balance with the Tao, or the universe. Taoists believe in a spiritual immortality, where the spirit of the body joins the universe after death. We had a conversation earlier today with some folks about the nature of the Hebrew scriptures, and that at the beginning of Genesis, we'll talk about how it's translated that God gives dominion to humans to rule the earth, to rule the plants and the animals. That's actually a mistranslation. The original was more focused on stewardship and not dominion or domination. And here we see this in alignment at the same time that they were talking about living in balance, that we should all seek to live in balance. And as we all know, nature balances itself. We are the only imbalanced force. Humanity is the only imbalanced force in nature. And so we must strive to live in harmony and in balance, and such is the way. Tao is hard to define, but sometimes understood as the way of the universe. It is simply the way things are. If we had to say it simply, it is what it is. That's Daoism. Daoism teaches that all living creatures ought to live in a state of harmony with the universe and the energy found in it. Qi is the energy present that guides us and the entire universe. Taoists do not believe in this energy as a god. However, they also believe that there are gods, and these gods that exist inside of Daoism also must abide by the rules and the principles of the Tao. Nothing is outside of the Tao, not even the gods. So, like all living things, they must also follow the rules of the Tao. Taoism became well known in the 8th century Common Era as the religion of the Tang dynasty. In the following centuries, it existed alongside Buddhism and Confucianism, which we'd already discussed. So we see that these types and principles are coming out at the same time, and they work well together. Why? Because they are non-combative. They don't say that you have to believe this and this alone. It doesn't say that you must believe this in order to achieve salvation, that you must understand and accept something as your personal Savior. No, it's simply stating, this is the way. Choose to follow it, and if you choose to follow it, you will find strength and virtue and harmony in your life. And many of these faiths espouse similar principles. It's about seeking first and foremost the truth as our guiding star. During the communist takeover, however, in 1949, Daoism, Confucianism, and other religions were banned. So for a brief period in time, Taoism was relegated to the fringes of society and banned. However, it did survive in Taiwan and is now making a resurgence in modern China. There is a pantheon of gods. People who study Daoism from the West are often surprised because it seems like there wouldn't be gods. But there are many gods, and they venerate these gods. However, they don't seem to have the personal nature. It's much more of a concept than a personality. So Taoism doesn't have a God in the same way that Abrahamic religions do. There's no omnipotent God who lives beyond the cosmos and has created the cosmos and everything inside of it. In Daoism, everything springs from the Tao, that there is something beyond our ability to understand, something that transcends our knowledge and our wisdom and our understanding that guides all of these principles. Today's scientists are finding this in the principles of quantum physics, that there are indeed rules and principles that guide all of the things of our universe, and we're slowly beginning to understand them. But the Tao itself is not God, nor is it a God, nor is it worshipped by Taoists. However, as often is the case, the person with the message is often revered as a god. And so consequently, Lao Tzu was revered for a long period of time, and still is in many circles, as a god or as the personification of the Tao. Nonetheless, most of these gods, as is the case with most other religions, were borrowed from other cultures as well. As the Buddha would say, there is nothing new under the sun. These deities are subject to the Tao. One of the principles that you're familiar with, probably quite intimately from Daoism, is the principle of yin and yang. This is one of the foundational underpinnings of Daoism. It's the force of ascending and descending dualities. They are matching pairs, light and dark, hot and cold, action and inaction, which work together towards a universal whole. It shows that all things are connected and that nothing makes sense by itself. Try explaining light in the absence of darkness. Try explaining cold in the absence of heat. It's only in their opposites that they find meaning. Yin is the quiet, female, intuitive receiving force that is associated with earth. The earth is a source of life. It provides all things that we need to survive. The yang, on the other hand, is the strong, male, creative, giving force that's associated with the heavens. The heavens blow over the earth, always in motion, always bringing about change. And it also, this respect, it is the yang that is the violent force. It is the one that brings about the strong storms, bringing about change. When yin reaches its climax, it recedes in favor of the yang. Then, when the yang reaches its climax, it recedes in favor of the yin. This is the eternal cycle. And you'll see inside each one of these, there is a dot. In the white, there's a black dot, and in the black, there's a white dot. It shows that inside each one of these forces is the seed of the other, and that one cannot exist without the other. Night and day, rain and fire, cold and heat, odd numbers even and even numbers, the moon and the sun. These are all representations of yin and yang. Now we'll chat about the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching is a collection of 81 chapters of poetry, really, of living in harmony with the Tao. It talks about the importance of living in harmony, about living with strength and virtue, but towards the goal of living in balance with all things. And this is the underpinning of all Chinese philosophy. Taoism is based on 3 pillars: compassion, simplicity, and patience. Keep this in mind, because this will also be something that we'll talk about when we get to Buddhism. Now, the pillars change, but they're very similar. In these ancient faiths, these concepts are very similar: compassion, simplicity, and patience. Lao Tzu said that these are our greatest principles, our greatest treasures. When we are simple in actions and in thoughts, we return to the source of being. And isn't that the way of our lives? As children, we see the world so simply. And then as teenagers, we become complicated. Why? Because we want to be what we perceive as adult, as grown up. And then we become that, and we wish that we could return to children all too quickly. We live the lives the first time with our children impatient, our minds focused on other things, our minds focused on our careers, on money, house, life. And then our children grow up and we realize we've missed all of those beautiful moments, and wouldn't we love them back? And then life gives us a chance again. We have grandchildren. And we make good of that because we no longer are impeded by those thoughts of old. We have clarity of thought. We're able to see now the purpose of life, which is to return to that simplicity. And before we know it, we're made simple once again by the forces of nature. We don't desire simplicity in this way, but it brings us to our knees nonetheless, and we become as children, requiring the care like a child again by those, hopefully, that we brought into the world. And so it's returning to the source of being: simplicity, kindness, compassion. Through patience with both friends and enemies, you accord things the way they are. This is the importance of patience. And by being compassionate towards yourself, you reconcile all things to the world. We focus on this idea of kindness and compassion to others, but it's impossible unless we're first compassionate with ourselves. We must first recognize that we are deserving of all good things. And when we recognize that we are deserving of all good things, we show ourselves compassion because we find ourselves worthy despite our failings. There are some wonderful lessons from the Tao Te Ching, and I'm going to ask you to set aside for a bit all of the things that you think you know, all of the things and the references that you have leading up to this moment. Set them aside if you can, and be in this present moment and receive these lessons as though you're hearing them for the first time. Surrender. Hold nothing back and surrender to yourself. Surrender yourself to what is. We should surrender ourselves to this moment. For this moment is all that there is. We know the difference between what's in our control and what's beyond our control. We know this cognitively. We know that death is the final outcome, so why should we fear it? And yet, we know that death is the final outcome, and it should make us kinder to each other. Just this recognition alone, and yet it doesn't. In the midst of recognizing that we all end in the same place, we still fill our minds and our hearts with all sorts of trivialities. So, why fear this death which is going to come? Why bother to worry about it? Instead, we should surrender to it and prepare ourselves for it, because we know that it may arrive at any time, as the Hebrew scriptures would tell us, like a thief in the night. We shouldn't hold on to anything because we know that nothing will last forever. There is no need to resist what is. Why even bother? The more we resist it, the more we suffer. As the Buddha would say, all of these things will come to us. Accept them in equal measure. Let the good come, accept it for a moment, let it go. And in the same way, let the bad come into your lives. We shun the bad. We want to stay away from the bad. We want only good. And in wanting only good, we hold on to it. We don't let it go. And when it goes from us, we're disappointed. That's heartbreak, because we desire something that we don't have. But if we simply admit and acknowledge that all of these things come into our lives, and they stay with us for a minute, and then they're gone, both good and bad, and we let them wash over us, embrace it for what they are, and let them go. And in so doing, we accept things as they are. In so doing, we follow the Tao. As the moment passes, we should let it go and be fully present in the new moment life has presented. When we stay focused on the past, we invite ourselves to spend time in depression, because we can do nothing about it. That moment is gone. To spend any time there is to accord yourselves with depression. To think about the future is an act of futility as well, because there is no such thing. It's always right now. Every moment that ever has been and ever will be is right now. When we live towards the future, though, as Mark Twain would say, we spend our lives worrying about all of these things, 80% of which will never happen. And it's true. We can't do anything about what happens in the future. All that we can do is live to our greatest ability right now. And in living in this moment, we recognize the power of the future and the futility of the past. We should do our best today to go to sleep and hold nothing back, like a child sleeps without thinking about the day, just sleeps. We know that we may not wake up tomorrow. And if we do, we should live in gratitude and live fully in the present. The present is all there is. The past is a memory, and the future is a trick of our imagination. All that is now in this present moment. Know your faults. Know your faults by observing others and how you judge others. It was Nikola Tesla who said that the more we age and recognize the condition of our own faults, that judgment is really confession. When we judge others, what we're really doing is confessing our own faults, which is why they say, really, we only recognize the faults in others that we have in ourselves. So in recognizing and in judging, what we really are doing is confessing. So know your faults by observing yourself and how you judge others. When we make a mistake, we should seek to first be aware of it. Having realized our error, we should admit it. And we should allow no leader who is unwilling to admit his error. Having admitted it, we should correct it. We shouldn't be offended by the ones who point out our faults. Instead, we should welcome them into our lives as we would generous teachers. We should work to treat every fault or weakness as an opportunity to increase our self-awareness and our value, to improve ourselves. Those who bring these things to our attention are the truest of friends, really. Our enemies are only shadows that we have cast in our hearts and minds. We see these people who are against us, and I think when we look back in our lives, we can truly look back and see with some level of clarity that the people who corrected us were really probably among our greatest friends. And then if we go back to the biblical scripture, talking about the shepherd, they talk about, the rod and the staff to guide, right? The rod and the staff were meant not to beat, but to guide and to direct. And that's what this is as well. This is what the people in our lives do for us. By correcting us, they help us see our true path, our true way, the Tao. We should be quick to correct our own faults when we see them in others. But instead, most of us are quick to correct their faults while missing them ourselves. Accepting our faults is difficult because it injures our ego. But remember, what hurts the ego is also good for the soul. Self-observation leads to self-awareness, which should guide us on the path to self-improvement. This was something I wrote. Enlightenment is mine when I learn patience from a child's quick temper, kindness from a lover's angry words, compassion from a parent's indifference, and peace from an angry friend, accepting all with gratitude, as though I have received from them the greatest of life's gifts. Competition. We're in the throes of competition right now in the United States, and it's a big one. What does the competition say about us? What does it say about the competitors? The purpose of competition is to playfully create and improve, so says the Tao. We shouldn't wish for our opponents to have a bad day on the day of competition. No, instead we should want them to be at their very best, to be at their top of their game, because in beating them, we have true fulfillment. We are truly victorious. What admiration can be given to someone who besmirches and who is mean or who tries to create an uneven playing field? No, this is not the true sense of competition, says the Tao. It shouldn't be an ego-driven event, but an opportunity to play and improve our skills. And everyone, when finished, should leave with a sense of pride and admiration for those involved. There are top 10, like David Letterman's top 10 themes. This is going to be the top 10 themes from the Tao Te Ching. The Tao is the infinite common source, eternally present within you. You don't even have to recognize it. It's always there. It always has been there. No beginning, no end. The essence of wisdom. Like a Nike commercial that says, just do it. The Tao says, just be. There is something formless and perfect before the universe was born. It is serene, empty, solitary, unchanging, infinite, eternally present. It is the mother of the universe. For lack of a better name, I call it the Tao. This is from chapter 25 of the Tao Te Ching, written about at the same time as the book of Genesis. Do you see any similarities? In the beginning was the nothingness, the darkness, a void, right? Interesting how at two very different cultures, at different parts of the world, this same concept is being developed in two similar ways, but for very different purposes. Approach it, and there is no beginning. Follow it, and there is no end, they say about the Tao. You can't know it, but you can be it at ease in your own life. Just realize where you come from. This is the essence of wisdom. We would say, how can you know where you're going unless you know where you come from, right? This is the same idea here. It's always present within you, the Tao. You can use it any way you want. And again, so it is. When you have this power of virtue and strength, you can use it any way you want. The question is whether and how we use it. The Tao is like a well, used but never used up. It is like the eternal void filled with infinite possibilities. The Tao nourishes by not forcing, by not dominating. The master leads. And here again we see this idea of what is leadership. Do we lead by dominating, by domineering? Or do we lead by example, by showing people the better way? All things end in the Tao as the rivers flow into the sea. The Tao is great. The universe is great. Earth is great. Man is great. These are the four great powers. Earth follows the universe. The universe follows the Tao. The Tao follows only itself. And here, if we go back to Christian or Abrahamic cosmology, we hear about the uncaused cause. The Tao follows only itself. We see the same concept emerge again, that there is something infinite, something that always has and always was and always will be. Centeredness is another concept. The great way is easy, yet people prefer the side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance. Stay centered in the Tao. We see this again in Buddhism. We'll see the middle path. This idea that there are many paths to the sides. We see this now in the political sphere. We have the far right, we have the far left. And yet most of us are right down the damn center, aren't we? And yet We align ourselves with people on the fringes. For what purpose, I have no idea. And yet here, as in all of the great scriptures, it tells us that the reasonable path is the center path. And it's only when we're willing to find compromise by eschewing the opinions on the sides that we take the center path. But we seek always to take the easier route. We think there's going to be an easier route down the side. No, the main route, the route of compassion, the route of compromise, the route of understanding, of rationality. This is the route. Stay centered within the Tao. The master, the leader, sees things as they are without trying to control them. She lets them go her own way and resides at the center of the circle. When you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. A little bit of common sense here too. This is an important one for us to consider, especially today. If powerful men and women could remain centered in the Tao, all things could be in harmony. The world would become a paradise. All people would be at peace, and the law would be written in their hearts. The Tao doesn't talk here about the average person. It speaks directly to the leaders. It speaks directly to the fortunate, to those with the power to effect change in the lives of others. It says, remain centered, seek harmony. If powerful men and women could center themselves in it, the whole world would be transformed by itself in its natural rhythms. People would be content with their simple, everyday lives in harmony and free of desire. Don't live life. Let life live you. You will be truly yourself and perfectly fulfilled. This leaves nothing to fear, not even death. When you have no self, you can let the Tao be present in your life and become genuine. The master views the parts with compassion because he understands the whole. So as we look back on our lives, we see these things clarity now. His constant practice is humility. He doesn't glitter like a jewel, seeking attention, but lets himself be shaped by the Tao, as rugged and common as a stone. He who defines himself can't really know who he is. Any attempt to define who you are at any time is incomplete. It's a worthless exercise. Why bother? And yet, we spend our entire lives given a name, an ethnicity, a nationality, and a religion. And we spend our entire lives defending them. For what purpose? For a title? For that which we've been told that we are? Letting someone else define who you are? And then spending the entirety of your life defending it to other people that you don't even know. The Tao says, he who defines himself can't really know who he is. Empty all of it. Let it all go. Whatever you think you are, whatever you think you know, let it all go, says the Tao. Rediscover yourself in the way of the Tao. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Managing and mastering yourself is true power. When I know myself, I know others. When I master myself, I don't need to master others. This is an important one, focusing on the idea of change. If you realize that all things change, there is nothing you will try to hold on to. If you aren't afraid of dying, there's nothing you can't achieve. Replace the word dying with a million other words. Failing, embarrassment, being noticed, falling short, whatever that might be. If you aren't afraid of those things, what can't you achieve? And if there's any message that I'd love for you to take back to your grandchildren or your children, it's that one right there. that if you're not afraid of anything, there's nothing you can't achieve. That's one of the most beautiful messages of the Tao. Look inside. Ordinary men hate solitude, but the master makes use of it, embracing his aloneness, realizing he is at one with the whole universe. So we get older, we recognize the power of being alone and how much that sustains us. The master observes the world but trusts his inner vision. He allows things to come and go. His heart is as open as the sky. Therefore, the master concerns himself with the depths and not the surface, with the fruit and not the flower. How often are we concerned with how things look as opposed to the fruit, the real wisdom behind it? He has no will of his own. He dwells in reality and lets all illusions go. This one is particularly for you. As Viking travelers, a good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent upon arriving. This one actually came up very funny one time when we had just had our itinerary changed due to some bad weather. And we had to change the entire course of the cruise. And they thought that that was a plant, but it wasn't. But it is. It's a great line from the Tao Te Ching. How do I know as anything is true? But by looking inside myself. Non-desire. Desire is an important part of the Tao. Be at peace in the present is the message. The master takes action by letting things go. We see this in our lives. When we let things go, somehow things magically happen. I have this great story of when my father was with me on the cruise. He would come with me, and we lectured, when I was been lecturing, he'd come with me for about 14 years, 1 month a year. And he mentioned to me, he said, boy, I love going on these Viking cruises because they take care of all of your food. You know, your bed is made in the morning, everything is new towels. He said, even your laundry. And I said, laundry? He said, yeah, every day I'd leave my clothing there in the bag, and I'd come a couple of days later, all my laundries. And I said, oh man, I've been doing your laundry for the past 10 years. But it's the same idea, right? It's the same idea that we concern ourselves with all of these things that we think we have to do. And more often than not, they simply master themselves. They simply happen without our worrying about them. The Tao isn't something you can know through intellect. It's something that you feel. Step back from your mind to truly understand it. It's the way. The more you know, as it says here, the less you understand. That knowledge isn't the goal. It's understanding. That we can know so many things and find ourselves separated by our knowledge from other people. It's compassion that binds us together. My dad loves this one too. Stop thinking and end your problems. And that's when he would pick up a drink. And he loved this one too. He said it so often came up at the perfect time. He said, particularly it's at the end of my lecture when I know I've been talking too long. He said, those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know. Not knowing is true knowledge. Presuming to know is the disease. First realize that you are sick, then you can move towards health. The master does nothing and leaves nothing undone. The ordinary man is always doing things, yet many more things are left to be done. Practice not doing, and everything will fall into place. Do your work, then step back, the only path to serenity. Most of us become too precious about the things that we create in our lives. And in doing that, we really create a stumbling block for our egos. The mark of a moderate man is freedom from his own ideas. The master has no possessions. The more he does for others, the happier he is. The more he gives to others, the wealthier he is. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize that there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. In the closing, we'll talk briefly about paradoxes. True words aren't eloquent, and eloquent words aren't true. Wise men don't need to prove their worth, and men who need to prove their worth aren't wise. Do you want to improve the world? The Tao says, I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. If you tamper with it, you will ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you will lose it. The Tao when it is lost, there remains goodness. When goodness is lost, there remains morality. When morality is lost, there remains ritual. And ritual is the husk of true faith. It is the beginning of chaos. This is an important line for those involved in religion on many levels. When we focus only on the ritual, we lose sight of the meaning. When they lose sense of their awe, people turn to religion. When they no longer trust themselves, they begin to depend upon authority. Give evil nothing to oppose, and it will disappear by itself. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. And in family life, be completely present. And in closing, the journey of 1,000 miles starts from beneath your feet. A man with outward courage dares to die. A man with inner courage dares to live. So says the Tao Te Ching. Living in the present helps us enjoy the little things in life. And the paradox of this is that at the end of our days, what we recognize is that the little things were really the big things. And that, in a nutshell, is the message of the Tao. To find joy in the present moment and to relish the little things, recognizing now and later that the little things are the most important things. And with that, I leave you. Thanks very much.